Woman saved a baby tiger. 15 years later, how baby tiger reacted will melt your heart. The radio crackled with static before going silent. Maya Sanders stared at the useless device, trying to quell her rising panic. She was supposed to check in with base camp 20 minutes ago, but the monsoon rains had other plans. The downpour had started suddenly, turning the humid air into sheets of water that transformed the jungle paths into muddy streams. Now she was alone, her communication cut off, and significantly off her planned research route. Just perfect, she muttered, stuffing the radio back into her waterproof pack. At 28, Maya was the youngest lead researcher on the Indo-Chinese Tiger Conservation Project, and she couldn't help but feel that every mishap would be scrutinized by her older colleagues. They already whispered that she was too inexperienced, too idealistic. Getting lost in a monsoon wouldn't help her case. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the dense canopy above. In that brief flash, Maya caught sight of something metallic glinting through the trees. Her curiosity piqued. Human objects this deep in the protected forest usually meant one thing: poachers. Despite the rational part of her brain screaming at her to head back to base camp, Maya found herself moving toward the metallic reflection. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, and she could hear the jungle coming back to life around her. Birds resumed their calls, and somewhere in the distance, a family of gibbons began their afternoon songs. As she pushed through a thick cluster of bamboo, Maya's boot caught on an exposed root. She stumbled forward, barely catching herself against a tree trunk. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it beneath the dripping canopy. A whimper, followed by a weak growl. Maya's heart leaped into her throat. She knew those sounds. She'd studied them, documented them, dreamed about hearing them in the wild. Tiger cub vocalizations. Moving more carefully now, Maya edged around a large boulder. What she saw made her blood run cold. A crude steel trap, its rusty jaws clamped around the back leg of a tiger cub no more than 4 months old. The poor creature's golden fur was matted with mud and blood, its normally bright eyes dulled with pain and fear. Maya's first instinct was to run forward and help, but years of training held her back. Where was the mother? A tiger cub this young should still be with its mother, who would be fiercely protective. She scanned the surrounding forest, looking for any sign of an adult tiger, but saw nothing but rain-soaked vegetation. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Pulling out her satellite phone, which thankfully still had signal, Maya quickly snapped several photos of the scene and the trap. Evidence for the anti-poaching units. Then, moving slowly and speaking in soft, soothing tones, she approached the cub. "Hey there, little one," she whispered. "I'm here to help. Please don't bite me." The cub's eyes fixed on her, and it let out another pitiful growl. But it didn't have the strength to do much else. Maya's trained eye could see signs of dehydration and exhaustion. This cub had been trapped for at least a day, maybe longer. Using her rain jacket as a shield, Maya managed to get close enough to examine the trap. It was a simple spring mechanism, illegal but unfortunately common. She'd learned how to disarm these during her training. The real challenge would be keeping the cub calm while she worked. That's when she noticed something that made her stomach turn. About 20 feet away, partially hidden by undergrowth, lay the body of an adult tiger. The mother. Maya's throat tightened as she realized what must have happened. The poachers had probably finished the mother, but before they could return to collect their prize and the cub, the monsoon had forced them to retreat. "I'm so sorry, little one," Maya whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "But I promise, I won't let them get you too." Working quickly but carefully, Maya managed to release the trap's mechanism. The cub was too weak to run or fight, and Maya took advantage of this to examine its injury. The leg was badly wounded but not broken, a miracle given the force these traps could exert. Maya knew she had to make a decision, and fast. Protocol dictated that she should call this in, wait for the wildlife rescue team to arrive, let them handle the cub's rehabilitation. But the nearest rescue center was overcrowded and underfunded. She'd seen cubs like this one before. They often didn't survive the stress of captivity, or worse, ended up sold to private collectors under the table. Looking into the cub's eyes, Maya made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She shrugged off her backpack and emptied it of all but the essential survival gear. Then, using her emergency thermal blanket as a makeshift sling, she carefully lifted the cub. "I really hope I don't regret this," she muttered, cradling the precious bundle against her chest. The cub, surprisingly, didn't struggle. Perhaps it sensed her intention to help, or maybe it was simply too exhausted to fight. Maya knew a place, an abandoned research station from the 1990s that she'd discovered during her surveys. It was off the grid, well hidden, and most importantly, not marked on any official maps. It would be the perfect place to nurse the cub back to health, assuming she could keep this massive secret from her colleagues and the authorities. As she began the treacherous hike through the rain-soaked jungle, Maya's mind raced with all the ways this could go wrong. She could lose her research position, her credentials, maybe even face criminal charges. But looking down at the vulnerable creature in her arms, she knew she couldn't have made any other choice. What Maya didn't realize, as she carefully picked her way through the undergrowth, was that this moment of compassion would set in motion a chain of events that would test her limits, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately lead to one of the most extraordinary relationships in the history of human-wildlife interaction. But for now, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, listening to the soft breathing of the cub against her chest, and praying she was doing the right thing. The abandoned research station turned out to be both a blessing and a curse. Its isolation provided the perfect cover for Maya's secret mission, but the dilapidated structure also presented countless challenges. The first night was the hardest. The cub's wound had become infected, causing a dangerous fever that left him shivering despite the tropical heat. Maya sat on the dusty floor, cradling the sick cub in her lap, using her satellite phone's dim light to check his temperature every hour. "You need a name," she whispered, trying to distract herself from her growing worry. "I can't keep calling you little one." The cub's eyes, though glazed with fever, fixed on her face as she spoke. Something about his fierce determination to survive, despite everything, reminded her of an old story her Indian grandmother used to tell about a tiger named Raka, who protected an entire village during a great flood. "Raka." She tested the name. The cub's ear twitched. "Raka it is, then." Days blurred together as Maya split her time between caring for Raka and maintaining her research duties to avoid suspicion. She'd radioed base camp the morning after the rescue, claiming the storm had forced her to take shelter in a cave. Now, she conducted her regular wildlife surveys during the day, then rushed back to the station to tend to her secret charge. The infection finally broke after 5 days of careful treatment with antibiotics from her field medical kit. That's when the real challenges began. Maya quickly discovered that caring for a recovering tiger cub was like handling a toddler with razor-sharp claws and the strength of a professional wrestler. Raka's personality emerged as his health improved. He was curious, playful, and surprisingly gentle, but also stubborn and too clever for his own good. One morning, Maya woke to find Raka had somehow managed to open her field kit and scattered her equipment across the station floor. Her heart stopped when she saw her precious radio in pieces. But instead of anger, she felt a surge of pride. This was the kind of intelligence and dexterity a wild tiger needed to survive. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" she laughed, watching him bat around her compass like a toy. Raka looked up at her with those intelligent eyes and made a chirping sound that seemed suspiciously like agreement. As weeks passed, Maya began to notice subtle changes in their relationship. Raka no longer simply tolerated her presence, he sought it out. He would wait by the station's entrance around the time she usually returned from her surveys, greeting her with happy chuffs and headbutts that nearly knocked her over. At night, he insisted on sleeping pressed against her side, his rhythmic purring lulling her to sleep. But it wasn't all gentle moments and cute behavior. Maya knew Raka needed to learn survival skills if he was ever to return to the wild. She began incorporating training into their daily routine, though training might have been too formal a word for what often felt like an elaborate game of hide and seek. She would hide pieces of meat around the station's perimeter, encouraging Raka to use his nose and instincts to find them. As he grew stronger, she expanded the hunting ground, teaching him to move silently through the undergrowth and identify potential prey signs. Sometimes, she would catch him practicing stalking moves on his own, pouncing on leaves and shadows with increasing precision. The turning point came 3 months into their secret arrangement. Maya was conducting a survey near the station when she heard an unfamiliar sound, Raka's hunting cry, but with a note of triumph she'd never heard before. Following the sound, she found him standing proudly over his first solo kill, a small muntjac deer. Maya's heart swelled with pride and broke a little at the same time. This was what she'd been working toward, but it was also a clear sign that Raka was growing up. His cute cub features had given way to the more defined face of an adolescent tiger, his playful movements becoming more graceful and predatory. That night, as they sat together under the stars, Raka had dragged his kill outside, and Maya had decided to join him with her dinner. She noticed something that stopped her mid-bite. A small group of fireflies had gathered near them, their gentle light creating a magical atmosphere. Raka watched them with fascination, but made no move to chase them, a far cry from the playful cub who would pounce at anything that moved. "You're changing," she said softly, reaching out to scratch behind his ears, one of the few cub-like behaviors he still enjoyed. "Growing into who you're meant to be." As if understanding her words, Raka turned to look at her. In the firefly's glow, his eyes held a wisdom that seemed ancient and wild. For the first time, Maya felt like she was truly seeing him not as her rescued cub, but as the magnificent predator he was becoming. That night marked a subtle shift in their relationship. While their bond remained strong, Maya began to notice Raka spending more time exploring the jungle around the station. He would disappear for hours at a time, returning with fresh kills and an air of growing independence. Sometimes, she would catch him sitting at the edge of the station's clearing, watching the deeper jungle with an intensity that spoke of awakening instincts. Maya knew she should be happy about these changes. They were exactly what she'd been working toward. But she couldn't help the bittersweet ache in her heart. She'd always known their time together was temporary, that Raka belonged in the wild. Still, she hadn't expected it to hurt quite so much. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Maya found Raka's latest kill, a wild boar, carefully dragged to the station's entrance. But instead of eating it alone as he usually did now, he waited until she emerged from the station. Then, to her surprise, he nudged the boar toward her with his nose. "Are you sharing with me?" she asked, amazed. Raka responded by sitting back on his haunches, watching her expectantly. It was a gesture that transcended the boundary between wild and tame, a predator choosing to share its kill. As Maya sat beside him, careful to show proper appreciation for his gift, though she had her own dinner waiting inside, she realized something profound. Their bond hadn't weakened as Raka grew more independent, it had evolved into something deeper, a connection between two beings who chose to trust each other despite their different natures. What Maya didn't realize was that this trust would be tested sooner than she expected, and in ways she could never have imagined. The wild was calling to Raka more strongly each day, and soon she would have to make the hardest decision of her life. The decision to release Raka wasn't made on any particular special day. Instead, it crept up on Maya through a series of small moments that gradually became impossible to ignore. The way he would pace restlessly at night, his growing absences that stretched from hours into days, and most tellingly, the increasing number of territorial marks she found around the station's perimeter. Raka was no longer content with their small piece of the jungle, he needed his own territory. But knowing something was right didn't make it any easier to accept. The catalyst came on a humid morning in late October. Maya was reviewing her research data when she heard an unfamiliar sound, a deep, resonant roar that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She rushed outside to find Raka standing at the edge of the clearing, his massive head turned toward the distant hills. The roar came again, and this time Raka answered it. Maya's heart sank. That was the call of a female tiger in heat. Nature was calling to Raka in a way she could never compete with. "I guess we can't put this off any longer, can we?" she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Raka turned to look at her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of the playful cub he used to be. But it was overshadowed by the powerful adult he had become, his muscles rippling beneath his magnificent coat, his eyes holding the wild wisdom of his kind. Maya spent the next few days preparing for the release, though in truth, Raka had been preparing himself for months. She chose a location deep in the protected area of the forest, far from known poaching routes, but close to good hunting grounds. She also needed to ensure it was far enough from other male tigers' territories to give Raka a chance to establish his own. The night before the planned release, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat on the station's worn wooden steps, looking up at the stars through breaks in the canopy. Raka lay beside her, his massive head resting on her lap like he used to do as a cub. The familiar weight was comforting, even as it reminded her of all that was about to change. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, running her fingers through his thick fur. "When I found you that day, I was so lost myself. Not just in the jungle, but in life." She smiled at the memory. "Everyone thought I was too young, too naive to lead the research project. I was trying so hard to prove them wrong that I'd forgotten why I fell in love with wildlife conservation in the first place." Raka's ear twitched, and he made a soft rumbling sound in his chest. "You reminded me what it was all about. Not just the data and the papers and the politics, but this, the real connection between humans and wildlife. The trust. The understanding." She wiped away a tear. "You taught me more than I ever taught you." The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the jungle itself was welcoming Raka home. Maya had chosen not to take any tranquilizers or transport cages. This needed to be Raka's choice. They would walk together to the release site, and then, well, she tried not to think too far ahead. The hike took several hours, with Maya carefully documenting their route while trying to memorize every moment. Raka seemed to sense the importance of the journey. He stayed close, occasionally brushing against her leg or waiting patiently when she needed to rest. They reached the chosen spot just as the sun hit its peak. It was a beautiful location, a small clearing near a stream, with plenty of cover and signs of prey animals. Maya had spent weeks scouting it, making sure it would give Raka the best possible chance. What happened next was something Maya hadn't prepared for. As they entered the clearing, Raka suddenly tensed. His head snapped up, nostrils flaring. Maya followed his gaze and her breath caught in her throat. On the other side of the clearing stood another tiger, a female, young and beautiful, watching them with curious eyes. Maya's heart raced. This wasn't part of the plan. While she knew there were other tigers in the area, she hadn't expected such an immediate encounter. She instinctively reached for Raka, but stopped herself. This was his world now. The female tiger took a step forward, then another. Raka remained perfectly still, but Maya could feel the energy radiating from him. The female made a soft chuffing sound, a friendly greeting among tigers. After what felt like an eternity, Raka responded with his own chuff. Maya knew this was it. This was the moment. Her legs felt like lead as she backed away, her vision blurring with tears. "Goodbye, my friend," she whispered. But Raka didn't immediately run to the female as Maya had expected. Instead, he turned to Maya one last time. His golden eyes met hers, and in them she saw everything: gratitude, affection, and a wild joy that told her she was doing the right thing. Then, in a gesture that nearly broke her heart, he pressed his massive head against her hand, just as he had done countless times as a cub. "Go," Maya managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Go live your life." This time, Raka listened. He turned away from her and walked toward the female with the confident stride of a wild tiger. The two cats disappeared into the undergrowth together, leaving Maya alone in the clearing. She stood there for a long time, letting the tears fall freely. The jungle seemed eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Then, from somewhere in the distance, she heard it, Raka's roar, powerful and free, echoing across his new territory. It was followed by the female's call, their voices twining together in an ancient song of the wild. Maya smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered to the jungle. As she began the long walk back to the station, she felt lighter somehow, despite the ache in her heart. She had done what she set out to do, given an orphan cub a second chance at a wild life. What she didn't know then was that this wasn't really goodbye. The jungle had its own plans, and Raka's story, their story, was far from over. But for now, she had to let him go, trust in his strength, and hope that somewhere in his wild heart, he would remember the human who had once been his family. 15 years had carved deep changes into the landscape Maya once knew so well. As she stood at the edge of the research station's helipad, now modernized with solar panels and satellite equipment, she barely recognized the jungle that had once been her home. Logging had eaten away at the borders of the protected area, and increased human activity had pushed wildlife deeper into the shrinking forest. "Dr. Sanders, your reputation precedes you," said Dr. Chin, the current project director, as they walked toward the main building. "Your papers on human-wildlife conflict resolution have become required reading at conservation schools." Maya smiled politely, though the praise felt hollow. After leaving this place 15 years ago, she had thrown herself into her work, earning a PhD and becoming one of the leading voices in tiger conservation. But success hadn't filled the void that Raka's departure had left in her heart. "The situation is worse than we initially reported," Dr. Chin continued, spreading a map across his desk. Red markers dotted the protected area, each representing a poaching incident. "We've lost 12 tigers in the past year alone. But that's not why we called you here." He pointed to a cluster of blue markers in the northeastern sector. "These are attacks on livestock in nearby villages. But here's the strange part, they're all attributed to a single tiger. An unusually large male, according to witnesses. He's been active in the area for years, but recently, his behavior has changed." Maya's heart skipped a beat. The northeastern sector, that was where she had released Raka. But no, she told herself, it couldn't be him. Tigers rarely lived beyond 12 to 15 years in the wild. Even if he had survived, he would be ancient by now. "Changed how?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "He's protecting them," Dr. Chin said, his expression puzzled. 3 months ago, a group of poachers was found tied up at a ranger station. They swore a massive tiger had attacked them, destroyed their weapons, and herded them straight to the authorities. We thought they were hallucinating from fear, but then it happened again. And again. Maya's mind raced. A tiger that actively protected other tigers? It was unheard of. Unless... "I need to see these sites," she said firmly. "All of them." The next few days were a blur of site visits and interviews. Maya insisted on conducting her surveys alone, claiming it was part of her methodology. In reality, she needed time to process the emotions that flooded back with every familiar path and clearing. On the 4th day, she found something that made her blood run cold. Hidden beneath some undergrowth was a rusted piece of metal, the same type of trap that had caught Raka all those years ago. But this one had been deliberately sprung, its deadly jaws rendered harmless. As Maya examined the trap, the jungle around her grew unusually quiet. The birds stopped singing, and even the insects fell silent. She felt it before she heard or saw anything, the weight of unseen eyes watching her every move. Slowly, she straightened up. The feeling of being watched intensified. A twig snapped somewhere in the dense foliage behind her, and Maya's survival instinct screamed at her to run. But something else, something deeper, told her to stay perfectly still. The attack came from an unexpected direction. A blur of orange and black erupted from the undergrowth to her left, but it wasn't aimed at her. A large leopard, one she hadn't even known was stalking her, was caught mid-leap by the attacking tiger. The two big cats tumbled in a snarling mass of fur and claws, but the fight was over almost before it began. The tiger, easily twice the size of the leopard, pinned its opponent with terrifying efficiency. The leopard scrambled away, vanishing into the jungle as quickly as it had appeared. Only then did Maya get a clear look at her savior, and her heart nearly stopped. The tiger was enormous, his muscled frame speaking of power and experience. Battle scars marked his face and flanks, telling stories of years spent defending his territory. But it was his eyes that held Maya transfixed, golden eyes that seemed to burn with an intelligence that went beyond wild instinct. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Raka?" The tiger's ear twitched at the name, but he made no move toward her. Instead, he sat back on his haunches, regarding her with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight into her soul. For a moment, Maya was transported back 15 years, to all those nights they had sat together under the stars. But this was no cute cub anymore. This was an apex predator, a king of the jungle who had not only survived but thrived. The scars on his face spoke of countless battles, while his healthy coat and powerful frame showed his success as a hunter. Then something extraordinary happened. The tiger lifted his massive head and let out a series of soft chuffs, the same friendly greeting he used to make as a cub. Maya's eyes filled with tears as memories flooded back. Before she could respond, a distant gunshot shattered the moment. The tiger's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body tensing. Without a backward glance, he disappeared into the jungle, leaving Maya standing alone with her heart pounding and her mind reeling. She fumbled for her satellite phone with shaking hands, checking the GPS coordinates. This encounter needed to be documented, though she knew she would never reveal the full truth in her official report. How could she explain that the mysterious guardian tiger of the forest was the same cub she had illegally rescued 15 years ago? As she marked the location, another shot rang out, closer this time. Maya hesitated only for a moment before heading toward the sound. If that really was Raka, and if he was going after poachers, he might need help. She knew it was foolish. She was no longer the young, reckless researcher she had been 15 years ago. She had a reputation to protect now, a career built on following proper protocols. But as she moved carefully through the undergrowth, Maya realized some things hadn't changed at all. She was still willing to risk everything to protect these magnificent creatures. And if her suspicions were correct, she wasn't the only one who had devoted their life to this cause. What she didn't know was that she was walking straight into a confrontation that would not only reunite her with her past but would challenge everything she thought she knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals. The jungle held one more surprise for her, one that would prove that some bonds truly do transcend time, nature, and reason itself. The jungle grew darker as Maya followed the sounds of conflict deeper into unknown territory. The familiar paths of her research route had long since disappeared, replaced by dense undergrowth that seemed to grab at her clothes with every step. More gunshots echoed through the trees, accompanied now by shouts and the unmistakable roar of an enraged tiger. Maya's satellite phone buzzed, Dr. Chen calling to check on her location. She silenced it without answering. How could she explain where she was going when she barely understood it herself? The rational part of her brain screamed that she was being foolish, that she should call for backup. But something stronger pulled her forward, a connection that defied logic and time. The sounds led her to the edge of a steep ravine. Below, a scene straight out of her nightmares unfolded. 3 armed men, poachers, judging by their equipment, were backing away from something hidden in the shadows of a large boulder. As Maya watched, horror struck, one of them raised his rifle. "No!" The word escaped her before she could stop herself. The poacher's head snapped up, and Maya realized her terrible mistake. She was unarmed, alone, and had just revealed her position to armed criminals. Well, the largest of the men called out in heavily accented English. "The famous Dr. Sanders, isn't it? We've heard about you." He gestured with his rifle. "Come down here, nice and slow. We need to have a chat about minding your own business." Maya's mind raced. The poacher knew her name, which meant this wasn't a random encounter. They had been watching the research station, probably for weeks. As she carefully made her way down the ravine's slope, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Behind the men lay the bodies of 2 tigers, a female and a half-grown cub. "You monsters!" she breathed, anger temporarily overwhelming her fear. The leader smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Business is business, Doctor. The breeding pair we finished last month fetched a good price. But this one," he gestured toward the boulder, "this one is special. Been causing us trouble for years. Too smart for his own good. A low growl emanated from behind the boulder, and Maya's heart leaped. She knew that sound. The leader raised his rifle again, but something was wrong. The massive tiger hadn't attacked yet, despite having the perfect opportunity. Then Maya saw why. A dark stain was spreading across his hidden flank. He was already wounded. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. She needed to buy time, but for what? Help was too far away, and even if she could call for backup, it would never arrive in time. The leader laughed. "A tiger is a tiger, Doctor. Worth more dead than alive, especially one this size. The only question is whether you'll be joining him." He turned to one of his companions. "Check her for phones or trackers." As the man approached Maya, time seemed to slow down. In that moment, a memory surfaced, Raka as a cub, learning to hunt. She had taught him that success wasn't always about strength or speed. Sometimes, it was about making your opponent think they had the upper hand. Maya let her shoulders slump in defeat, allowing the man to get closer. Then, in one fluid motion, she grabbed the flash grenade from her belt, standard equipment for wildlife researchers in dangerous territories, and hurled it directly at the poacher's feet. The explosion of light and sound echoed off the ravine walls. The poacher staggered, temporarily blinded. Maya dove for cover behind a fallen tree, her ears ringing from the blast. Through the chaos, she heard a sound that made her skin prickle, not a roar of anger, but a low, calculating growl. The massive tiger emerged from behind the boulder, moving with deadly purpose despite his wound. But instead of attacking immediately, he positioned himself between Maya and the poachers. Their eyes met for a split second, and in that moment, Maya saw something that took her breath away. Recognition, clear as day, and something more. A plan. It was the same look he used to give her during their training sessions, when they worked together to achieve a goal. Without thinking, Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out her backup flash grenade. Understanding passed between them like an electric current. The leader of the poachers had regained his vision and was raising his rifle. "Finish them both!" he shouted. Maya threw the second grenade, but this time, Raka was ready. The moment it left her hand, he launched himself forward. The flash caught the poachers just as they were tracking his movement, and in their moment of blindness, Raka struck. What followed was both terrifying and beautiful to witness. Raka moved with the precision of a master predator, but there was intelligence behind every action. He didn't kill, instead, he disarmed and disabled, using his massive size to knock the men down and his teeth to destroy their weapons. The leader, in a desperate move, pulled a pistol from his boot. But before he could aim, Maya tackled him from behind. They struggled for the weapon, rolling dangerously close to the ravine's edge. The leader was stronger, but Maya had something he didn't: absolute faith that Raka would have her back. Sure enough, a massive paw swept the pistol away, sending it skittering into the undergrowth. The leader found himself staring into the golden eyes of a tiger who clearly understood exactly what he had been planning to do. The fight ended as quickly as it had begun. The poachers, disarmed and thoroughly terrified, huddled together as Raka stood guard. Maya quickly used their own rope to bind them, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Only then did she turn her full attention to Raka. The wound in his flank was bleeding freely now, but his eyes were clear and focused. He stood tall despite the pain, every inch the guardian he had become. "Let me help you," Maya whispered, slowly approaching with her medical kit. "Just like old times, remember?" Raka watched her for a long moment, then did something that brought tears to her eyes. He slowly lowered himself to the ground, exposing his wounded side, a gesture of complete trust that went against every wild instinct. As Maya worked to stop the bleeding, she felt the years melting away. This magnificent creature had not only survived but had chosen to continue what she had started, protecting his kind, defending his territory not just from rival tigers but from human threats as well. The sound of approaching helicopters broke the spell. The research station must have tracked her phone's last location. Soon, the clearing would be full of rangers and researchers, and this extraordinary moment would become part of the official record, though perhaps not the whole truth. Maya finished bandaging Raka's wound just as the first helicopter appeared overhead. He rose to his feet, their eyes meeting one final time. In that gaze, Maya saw everything they had shared and everything they had become. Then, with a grace that belied his size, he disappeared into the jungle, leaving Maya to deal with the aftermath and the questions that would inevitably follow. But she knew this wasn't goodbye. Something had changed in their reunion. A new understanding had been forged. Their paths would cross again, and next time, she would be ready. The aftermath of the poacher incident created a media storm that Maya hadn't anticipated. Headlines worldwide proclaimed the extraordinary story of a tiger that protected both its own kind and humans. Experts debated the implications, some claiming it was impossible, others suggesting it might change our understanding of wild animal behavior. Maya kept the full truth to herself. 3 weeks after the confrontation, she sat in her new research blind near the site where she had released Raka 15 years ago. The wound in his flank had been serious but not life-threatening, and recent pug marks suggested he was still patrolling his territory. She had been coming here every evening, supposedly to document tiger behavior patterns, but in reality, she was waiting. Tonight was different. The jungle held its breath as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Maya checked her camera equipment one last time, though she knew she wouldn't be using it. Some moments weren't meant to be documented. The soft rustle of leaves behind her made her smile. "You always did prefer to make an entrance," she said quietly, not turning around. Raka emerged from the undergrowth like a ghost, his massive form moving with impossible grace for his size. The wound in his flank had healed well, leaving yet another scar to add to his collection. In the fading light, he looked like something out of a legend, a spirit of the jungle made flesh. "I've been reading about you," Maya continued, still not moving as he circled around to face her. "The villagers call you Raksha, the protector. They say you've been watching over this forest for years, keeping both tigers and humans safe." She smiled. "Though I suspect they'd be surprised to learn your real name." Raka sat back on his haunches, regarding her with those intelligent golden eyes. The years had turned him into something extraordinary, not just a powerful predator, but a guardian who had chosen to protect rather than simply survive. "I've been offered a permanent position here," Maya told him. "Director of Conservation for the entire reserve. They want me to study what they're calling the guardian tiger phenomenon." She laughed softly. "If they only knew it started with a scared young researcher and an orphaned cub in a monsoon storm." Raka made a soft chuffing sound, and Maya's heart swelled. After all these years, he still remembered their private language. She reached into her bag slowly, pulling out something she had kept for 15 years, the tattered remains of the thermal blanket she had used to carry him to safety that first day. "I kept it," she said, holding it out, "to remind me that sometimes breaking the rules is the right thing to do." Raka's reaction surprised her. He leaned forward and gently sniffed the blanket, then did something that brought tears to her eyes. He pressed his massive head against her shoulder, just as he had done countless times as a cub. The gesture was so familiar, so full of trust and affection, that Maya couldn't help but wrap her arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his fur. They stayed like that for a long moment, human and tiger, their hearts beating in sync. When Maya finally pulled back, she saw something in Raka's eyes that she had never noticed before, not just intelligence or wild wisdom, but peace. He had found his place in the world, creating a balance between his wild nature and his chosen role as protector. A distant roar echoed through the trees, another tiger calling from deep in the forest. Raka's ears perked up, but he didn't immediately move. Instead, he turned back to Maya and did something that left her speechless. He gently took the old thermal blanket in his teeth and walked a few steps into the jungle. Then he stopped and looked back at her expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" Maya asked, hardly daring to believe it. Raka waited patiently as she gathered her courage and stepped forward. Then he led her through the darkening forest, moving slowly enough for her to keep pace. They walked for about 15 minutes before reaching a hidden clearing. What Maya saw there made her gasp. In a natural den formed by fallen trees and thick vegetation lay a tigress, the same one she had seen during their first reunion. Beside her were 3 tiny cubs, no more than a few weeks old. The tigress raised her head as they approached, but showed no sign of aggression. She clearly knew and trusted both Raka and, amazingly, Maya. "Oh, Raka," Maya whispered, understanding dawning. "You're not just protecting the forest. You're building a family, creating a legacy." Raka dropped the thermal blanket near the den's entrance, then went to nuzzle his mate and cubs. The message was clear. He was connecting his past with his present, showing Maya that the love and protection she had given him had rippled outward, touching not just his life but the lives of generations to come. Maya sat down at a respectful distance, watching as Raka interacted with his family. The cubs tumbled and played, already showing the same intelligence in their eyes that she remembered seeing in their father. The tigress watched Maya with curious acceptance, as if understanding the special bond she shared with her mate. As night fell and stars began to peek through the canopy, Maya realized something profound. The story she had begun 15 years ago hadn't ended with letting Raka go. It had merely transformed, growing into something larger than she could have imagined. She wasn't just a woman who had saved a tiger, she was part of a continuing tale of trust, protection, and love that transcended the boundaries between wild and tame. Raka returned to sit beside her, his presence both familiar and awe-inspiring. Together, they watched his cubs play in the starlight, 2 beings from different worlds united by a bond that defied explanation. "Thank you," Maya whispered, "for showing me that some connections never break. They just grow stronger, like roots beneath the forest floor, holding everything together." Raka responded with a deep, rumbling purr that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. It was a sound of contentment, of belonging, of a circle completed but not ended. As Maya prepared to leave the clearing that night, she knew things would be different now. She would continue her work protecting the forest and its inhabitants, but with a deeper understanding of the connections that bound all living things together. And on quiet nights, when the moon was full and the jungle sang its ancient songs, she would return to this clearing to sit with her old friend, watching his legacy unfold beneath the stars. For in the end, their story was more than just a tale of a woman and a tiger. It was a testament to the power of compassion, a reminder that love given freely could transform not just one life but an entire forest. And in a world that often seemed divided between human and wild, their bond stood as proof that the truest connections knew no boundaries, surviving against all odds, growing stronger with each passing season, like the ancient trees that had witnessed their extraordinary journey.